All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Clark. I'm the director of the Local Government Center at Montana State University. We're hosting this in partnership with the Montana Association of Counties, this town hall meeting. And this session will be recorded for posterity's sake. I'm sure there are people in the archives who would love to watch this at some point way into the distant future. But just to let you know, we're recording this and it will be posted on our website along with MACo's website, probably be up on Monday. So if you want to share this with some of your colleagues that aren't able to attend, please feel free to do that. Also, just as a brief reminder of how to navigate the WebEx platform, if you look on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a mute button. And if we'll kindly ask you, everyone, if you could please keep your self muted until you have a question. If you have a question, you can either use the chat box, which is on the right-hand side, or you can raise your hand. And the way you do that is you hover over your name under the participant list, and you will see a little hand. And you click on that, and that'll be an indicator for me that you have a question you'd like to ask. And then when it's time for that, the question answer period, I will unmute you and allow you a chance to ask your question and engage in a conversation. So this is typically how we've run the meetings in the past, and I'm sure you're getting to be pretty savvy at doing this. I'd also like to say hello to all my friends and other commissioners and other elected officials that we met over this past week as we've traveled around the state with MACo and doing training for the newly elected county officials. We were in Glasgow and Forsyth this last week and had a great turnout and had an enjoyable time meeting and discussing and sharing information with everybody. And I'd like to remind those on the other side of the state, we'll have the same training will be offered in Dillon on Tuesday of this coming week and Thursday in Choteau. So if you want to learn more about those two training sessions that are being offered both live and via Zoom, you can go to the MACo website, and on their front page of their website, there's a link there to get more information and to register. So we encourage pre-registration so we know how many people will be attending and we can get enough handouts. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I'll think of something later. But again, welcome. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn the time over. Turn the time over. I'm just reading my chat here. I got some chats over to Eric to give us an update on the CARES Act and where we're at right now with the implementation of the CARES funding to local governments. So I will turn it over to Eric.
Mr. Clark, thank you. And also thank you for traveling with us last week. It has been enjoyable so far. And I echo your comments about the upcoming sessions in Dillon and Choteau. They are worthwhile and they're the best that we can do to accommodate the need for elected official training in the middle of a pandemic. We're at least getting to see other people in live situations, face-to-face, 6 feet apart, as appropriately socially distanced, but it allows for a little interaction. So I encourage any of you folks that weren't able to participate in the last two, join us in person in Dillon and Choteau. And if you can't, you can still zoom in and listen to the presentations as they're unfolding for those 2 days. We have some pretty significant updates today, so I want to kind of cut to the chase and review what's happened in the last week and a half with our local government reimbursement program with the state of Montana. But I want to rewind back to March when the pandemic first hit, and there was hint of federal legislation that was going to be in place to try and help communities get through this COVID-19 pandemic. From those early stages in March, when the governor created his coronavirus task force, he was nice enough and gracious enough to allow local governments to have a role in that task force and appointed me from MACo and Tim Burton as the executive director of the League of Cities and Towns to participate in that task force. We focused our attention in the very first several meetings on business stabilization and recovery efforts, so grant funding and targeted cash relief to impacted businesses and employees was the first priority of the task force, but we immediately shifted after those first rounds of funding and grant opportunities came out to local government assistance. And that is what was the end result of this local government reimbursement program with CARES Act funding. The state was always in control of the rules. The state was always in control of the eligible costs. And our job, in my mind, throughout this pandemic has been to advocate for reasonable COVID-19 related costs that were in compliance with guidance issued by the U.S. Treasury and supplemented by the Inspector General on what was eligible to be used for CARES Act funding. And, frankly, on your behalf, we had worked really well with the state agencies and had weekly meetings with the budget office and local government services bureau that was responsible for creating the reimbursement program, coming up with the templates, the forms, the guidance documents, the eligible expenses, and marching them through. I want to thank especially Jason for the work that he's done individually with counties that had issues in completing the spreadsheets, running the payroll reports, saying what was eligible and what wasn't eligible. And as you guys can recall, this has always been somewhat of a moving target. Early on in the pandemic, as your advocates, we were encouraging the budget office to make presumptively eligible payroll expenses include your detention, your 911, your law enforcement, and your public health in direct accordance with the guidance that was issued by the U.S. Treasury and verified by the Office of Inspector General. There were certain examples where you were doing payroll reports early on and they were asking you to take out benefits. And we pointed repeatedly to the state that benefits were an eligible reimbursable expense. I think that took about 2 months before the state recognized and then authorized those payments of benefits. So then you had to backdate payroll expenses and include detention, which wasn't authorized before. My point being, this program has modified as we've gone forward. All the modifications in my mind up until the day before Thanksgiving has been positive for local governments. We had advocated for and got further clarity of known COVID-19 response costs and received eligibility for additional reimbursements. And then Wednesday happened. And this is what happened. For about a week and a half, there had been a number of pre-authorization requests that were stacking up. We estimated that was somewhere just around $3 million in emergency medical service equipment that we hadn't received responses back from the budget office. We had been pushing them, Jason and I had been pushing them for a meeting in person, or at least a Zoom meeting, to get some of these pre-auths done before Thanksgiving. And at 10:30 at night on Tuesday night, we received notice from the budget office that they were willing to have a conversation at 1:30 the following day. We, of course, accepted it. And that meeting started, and Jason was on the phone with me, and essentially the quote was, "I only have 30 minutes for this phone call, and there's no good way to deliver bad news." And they went through a process of explaining to us last Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, that the local government reimbursement program, for all intents and purposes, was shutting down. They presented us with a list at 1:39, 9 minutes into the phone call, by email of projects that were submitted in advance for pre-authorization that were funded. It was about half of them that were authorized and the other half remained with blanks. We asked for clarification that if there was no number or no yes or no on the lines, that those were essentially rejected, and they said yes, that the money had run out and they couldn't afford this. The program couldn't afford to pay any more of those pre-authorization requests. I'll turn it over to Jason from there, because it was at that point in that conversation with 30 minutes in total and telling us that the program was shut down, my mind started to go into different directions. And Jason, you can take it from there with what happened moving Friday and then on to Monday.
So at that point, the shock factor was pretty strong on the phone call, and we had frankly, pretty well dead silence from both Eric and I and the league folks trying to digest what we just heard. I asked for point blank clarification of whether or not what I was hearing was them shutting down the program, and their not so smooth answer was, it is shutting down. So of course, that put into fear all of the pre-approved costs that we had sent you on their behalf over the last several months that were not completed. A lot of worry crept into all of us. So at the end of that call, we agreed to have a follow-up on Friday to try and come through the details. Some of those details were, what are we going to do? Are we actually going to get the official no on the projects that we'd asked for pre-approval that had been dangling for a week and a half? We're going to be denied. When we got together on Friday, and Eric asked me to sit in, he sat out. Mostly so that we could make a point while still being involved. We negotiated those projects that had been requested for pre-approval. They'd received by that Wednesday back into the fold, and they agreed to fund those. So at that point, we knew that there were additional dollars that they had not actually spent that they could pull back in if they had to. So that was a little bit of a win that we got on Friday. The frustration from us was strong. I remained mostly silent on the phone, simply trying to make my point by that versus going on a rant. Commissioner McGinley jumped on, listened in, had a couple of pointed questions for them as we went through it. But in the end of that day, they agreed that they would put in writing their new guidance. They would address some of our questions. And include contact information for you all to start reaching out, because at that point, our clarity on what they were agreeable to and not agreeable to was minimal at best. So we went through Friday with that outcome, awaited guidance on Monday morning. We got the first draft of the new guidance. Eric and I were in Malta eating lunch when it came through. We made comments. The comments that we made were related to the pre-approval of electronic digitization of records, et cetera, that we had a $10 million window of agreed to. There were several of those out that we were not running through the state because we'd been given authority. We asked for clarification on that. We wanted point blank clarification on all the other pre-approvals that had been given, and they revised once again the guidance, and the final version was what hit your inbox late Monday afternoon. Eric, you want me to go through the details now, or you want to jump back in with?
No, I think right now, before we go into the details and try and provide as much clarity as we can, I'd open it up to Commissioner McGinley.
There, I'm unmuted. I was privy to some of the emails that you sent after your bombshell news on the day before Thanksgiving, and I know, Eric, you were mad. I can understand. I appreciate what you did, trying to get their attention on that thing, and that's why I asked if I could jump on that phone call with Jason just to hear what they were doing and put some of these aspects into the county perspective of some of the agreements that were made ahead of time. Beaverhead County's got a real weird payroll, so we worked with them and they've agreed to let us do it on quarterly. So our last claim that everybody put through October, Beaverhead County's only put through September. So that was some of the questions. Are we still eligible to do October? The little town of Lima with our sheriff contract, the agreement was we were going to wait to the very end to do just one check reimbursed for their law enforcement. Is that still eligible? And those were some of the questions. I think this goes back to the whole history of trusting the state to take care of help county and local governments. And we, as the session keeps coming up, we got to watch ourselves. So. But I do thank you and Jason for all you did since March for us on that, though.
Thank you, Commissioner McGinley. Jason, I'll turn it back over to you, but I want to just, before we go through what we know right now, the part of the reason that this is frustrating for us, and I am extending an apology in advance, is that I probably have 50 some emails from special districts granting pre-authorization based on the local government or the budget office giving us that authority to allow for special districts and counties to make purchases through the end of December in accordance with the general parameters of this local government reimbursement program, which was $300 million December 30th. $300 million to spend. December 30th is the install and operational date. Those are the cornerstones of the program as articulated by the governor and the budget office. Well, I have multiple examples just in the last week. Toole County, for example, had authorization for a significant amount of purchases that the state didn't recall or didn't have on their list of approved. And so they tell Toole County no by email. When I dig out the email and show them that it was pre-authorized, it goes back on the funded list. They have, we have, at the state's direction, had authorized ordering of equipment like laptops and personal protective equipment for counties and special districts that were clearly pre-authorized and that we were told to communicate to our members that don't show up on any document or spreadsheet that the state has. So we will run into problems with pre-authorizations and incurred expenses that the state, I hope, is going to be inclined to pay, that we told our members and special districts would be reimbursed, that should be reimbursed. But the details of the closure of the program essentially says 200 million is the cap, and October 31st was the expiration date, except for the additional provisions that Jason will review with you right now.
All right, so let's go through some of the details. I'll tell you what I think it means. I'll tell you when I am not sure I know what it means, but I want to finish at the end with saying if you have a pre-auth that you want confirmation of, let's get in touch with the state. And what we'll have you do so that you get a direct answer on D of A from a D of A person, I will help you draft it and have you submit it directly to get a straight answer. And the reason I say this is I had a county, Eric's got several, but I had one contact me this morning. We have a pre-approval for X. We also did Y because of your guidance on digitization. I don't have an email to that effect, but we talked about it. And so your guidance was it was eligible. Is it going to be reimbursed? We're going to be done with it next week. And because we don't have any written correspondence with the state, we're reaching out on that digitization and saying, confirm that this is covered based on the agreement that MACo had with you. There's probably multiple others of those, whether you bought a laptop or you digitize records at a much more expensive clip. Let's get those asks in so that if they need to move money back around, we give them the opportunity to. So the new guidance, I'm going to start with the second sentence in the first paragraph. The intent is to allow all local governments to be reimbursed through October 31st. So that to me means everything, if you submitted in November for all your expenses through October, other than some things that we'll go through coming up, you're in essence, you've received all of the reimbursement you're going to get, specifically on your presumptive payroll. So your sworn officers, your public health officer, your detention, your 911 dispatch, those folks, if you've got through October 31st on all of those, that's the end of it, according to this new guidance. Now, there are some exceptions for costs incurred going forward, if they're in addition to what you have budgeted, et cetera, that we'll go through. But your normal budgeted costs for payroll are now shut off effective October 31st. It goes on to say they're going to provide financial relief to entities for those additional costs incurred through December 30th, such as overtime, additional staff, and reasonable non-payroll items. They give a few examples of these things. I understand overtime. If you have to pay your folks overtime, the overtime hours are going to be eligible. I also understand if you have to hire additional staff, contact tracers, additional folks to help make sure stuff is cleaned up, those costs are still eligible. The last one, I'm not sure how to wrap my head around, and it's reasonable non-payroll items. I picture that as PPE. I think non-payroll reasonable items are your, a laptop for somebody working from home, but I don't have a good handle on what they will or won't approve. So if you're looking to purchase something that fits in that category, that's not something you're going to buy anyway, and that you would like to get reimbursed and you want to make sure it's going to be, let's get pre-approval. But I'm going to ask when you do that, I'll help you word it, but I'll ask that you submit it direct. The next sentence is the next cycle. So although they, in essence, closed October 31st, The next cycle to apply will not be till January 11th. So between now and the end of the month, we'll identify any additional costs, and all of you with eligible expenses will have one last chance to submit through their program starting January 11th. It will close on January 22nd. So it's a really tight window. Please, everybody, jot those dates down. Okay. Bullet point number 1, all entities are eligible for reimbursement through 1031. If you have not submitted, and I think there's only one county that hasn't submitted at all, you are eligible to submit for all expenses, including presumptive payroll, through October 31st in the January deadline. You're not going to be penalized for having not submitted. If you submitted in cycle 3, but not cycle 4, you can catch up between cycle 3 and cycle 4. Mike, if you have incurred the cost, but you did not pay them or ask for them in your cycle 4, my interpretation of this is yes, you would be able to ask for those for that last month of your payroll, given that you did not. So I would include that. So there's no, because they cut it off, they're not going to penalize those of you who did not submit this last cycle. The caveat at the end of all this is that $200 million number, and I'm going to finish with that, but keep that in mind. The second bullet is that they're going to honor the pre-approved purchases, with the note that they have to be in service or in use by December 30th, and I will elaborate a little bit on that. Treasury guidance allows some latitude there, but they are saying in use by December 30th. If your pre-approval, if your actual costs exceed the amount of the pre-approval, they are not going to guarantee they will cover the additional costs. So if you have a construction project that they've approved and you said it was going to be 80 grand, probably only going to get 80 grand. So make sure you're monitoring those costs closely. As far as what's eligible for November and December, additional public health and safety personnel costs. So overtime, additional employees, additional enforcement, those folks, your presumptive is no longer eligible. So if you hire additional staff, if you have overtime, or you contract additional staff, eligible. Folks you have in budget, on staff already, no longer eligible. Again, they get to the essential non-payroll items. I don't have a great answer on what exactly that means. The only way we're going to narrow that down is to keep asking questions. So if you look to purchase something that you think fits that category, and you want to make sure you're going to get reimbursed, we need to ask. Costs associated with enforcement of local health directives prior to October 31st. Those of you who've been watching the news, or his press releases, that they have advocated for additional enforcement for locals, and they're going to honor those additional costs for the counties that are utilizing that. And then the last thing they have is generic technology pre-approvals given as part of the $10 million set aside that I referenced earlier, and the case management software, which a lot of your county attorneys have taken advantage of, must be in process as of November 30th to be eligible. And that's bold and underlined. To be considered for reimbursement through December 30th, and it's subject to the availability of funds. They have put a $200 million stop loss in their guidance. They've said, we're going to honor all of the things that we just went through, subject to a cap of $200 million. I don't know, given what you all might have outstanding, what you will have in additional eligible costs when we will hit that $200 million. We will advocate for expansion of that $200 million if we exceed it. But I don't know how they're going to react to that, given that they've given us a hard stop. That's my biggest concern with the new guidance, outside of the the way they rolled it out, frankly, and some of the unknowns going forward, and the fact that 2 months worth of presumptively eligible costs have been pulled back off the table. Those are my biggest concerns. I want to talk a little bit. A lot of you have pre-approved equipment purchases that we have all along said bought, paid for, and in service by December 30th. I want to read to you what the guidelines from Treasury says, and then give you my worry because the state is giving different guidance. So those of you that have agreements with vendors, contracts with vendors, to have that delivered, if they're not going to get that delivered on time, this is my concern. So the Treasury guidance says, given that it's not always possible to estimate with precision when a good or service will be needed, the touchstone in assessing the determination of need for a good or service during the covered period will be reasonableness at the time of delivery or performance was sought, i.e. the time of entry into a procurement contract specifying a time for delivery. So if you entered into the agreement, they said they were going to have it by December 30th. Similarly, in recognition of the likelihood of supply chain disruptions and increased demand for certain goods and services, if a recipient enters into a contract requiring the delivery of goods or performance of services by December 30th, the failure of a vendor to complete services December 30th will not affect the ability of the recipient to use payments from the fund to cover such goods. That's what the feds say. So that's the guidance of the feds to the state. That is not the same as what the state, who, as Eric said to begin this, always had control of the rules for us. That's not what they're saying. And I will read to you a quick note that we got as recent as November 30th from Department of Administration. And it says, "Hi, Michelle. Most importantly, the item must be received and put in use by December 30th. It is not required that the payment be made by December 30th." So she's giving a little bit of latitude on that now, but it is encouraged, and if not, should be made shortly after. But it's really clear that they're saying it has to be in hand and in service. So if one of your vendors reaches out and says, we're not going to be able to deliver, we need to deal with that right away. So please reach out to DFA directly, or if you'd like our assistance, please let me know, and I'm happy to try and help you get the wording in, help you line up your argument, and advocate in any way I possibly can. Any questions on the details of where we're at?
Jason, I expect that we're going to get a lot of questions about the cap, and I just want to be clear that on Wednesday, when we had that initial conversation, the budget office estimated that we were currently at, with the pre-auths that they knew of, 195 million. So the flexibility from last Wednesday through the end of December is, as near as I can tell with what they reported to us, a total $5 million between all cities, counties, towns, and special districts.
The 195 included the pre-auths that they had, but not the pre-auths that they don't have. And they did not include, we have counties out there that did not submit this last time, and a few that only submitted once so far, and one that has yet to submit. So I have concerns over that number, and I need to step away and plug my computer in, or I'm gonna lose y'all.
So questions, text, or the chat board is open. I did respond to one, but let's have a discussion and answer some questions. And I feel bad for Mr. Clark. He doesn't have his trusty professional assistant. He's gonna have to handle this all by himself.
Yeah, and she does so well at this too. So I'm gonna herky jerk my way through this thing. But yeah, so if you have questions, go ahead, raise your hand or put it in the chat box. But yeah, what are your thoughts, questions, concerns you want to get out there with the group? And Jason Strofe, do you have a thought or comment? Do you want to do that now or later?
I can do it now, Dan. I think it's very appropriate in this setting especially, but I said thank you to Eric and Jason during the training in Forsyth on behalf of the executive board, and I think it's appropriate to do that now. I think it's needed to do that now. when the budget office personnel came out and blindsided MACo, blindsided both of you on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I think we all feel the frustration. I hope nobody harbors any blame towards Jason or Eric in regards to that. I don't think there was any writing on the wall or signs on the road or anything indicating that the state was operating in anything other than the transparency and holding to the guidelines that they had set forth. But thank you to Eric and Jason for all of the efforts throughout this whole process to get the state and the budget office to flex on disbursement of this money. Your efforts, I think, alone, in addition to efforts of counties, have brought millions and millions of dollars to much needed counties to add to the resources to deal with this pandemic that we're all in the middle of right now. So again, thank you on behalf of the executive board, and look forward to working with you throughout the rest of this to try to get as much as we can down to the local government level.
Commissioner, I do appreciate that. But I do, we take this really seriously. We helped and we coordinated and we facilitated. We communicated on behalf of the budget office. We communicated on behalf of our counties back and forth. We are right in the middle of this. And in my mind, they relied on the integrity that we have as your staff to be able to communicate back and forth with those cornerstones of the program that were just changed midstream. And I take responsibility for that. We're out on the limb with pre-authorizations and a process where we told you to trust and move forward and plan to have known costs reimbursable through the end of December. And that's not the case anymore. So thank you for that. But you also get my apology.
Thanks, Jason. If Ashley were here, she would be reading the chat to make sure it's in the recorded record. As you may know, that when this is recorded and rendered, we lose the content of the chat, and we don't want to because it may be dealing with questions that aren't necessarily discussed. So I'll make an attempt to read some of this, so bear with me. What risk do we run if we request the amount as allowed by CARES and Treasury guidance, even though the state is now saying no, i.e. presumptive labor, pay, time off, etc.? Eric's response was no risk, and I encourage that sort of submission. No, the presumptively eligible payroll cost per Treasury will be rejected, and it may require additional work on your part of the reject and ask you to resubmit. But I would like to run a running total of COVID-19 response costs rejected by the state when this is all said and done. So you probably want to keep track of all that I'm sure, for future discussions and engagement.
That's the point, especially and I've talked to a couple of counties that are going to just submit as normal and get those rejections. Well, I've got a tally of rejections for emergency medical services equipment where the state's responded back that they don't have any money. Projects that have been funded in one case 30 times throughout this process that as of Monday were rejected. So I want that tally, because our press inquiries have been about what are the consequences of the governor moving 110 million out of this program. I want to be able to say the consequences are X, Y, and Z were left unfunded.
Yeah.
I too talked to a couple of folks that asked about whether they should include all of the payroll, the presumptive payroll, in the next submission anyway, and my response was, if you're willing to take the phone call when they say, hey, didn't you read the new guidance? And willing to say, yeah, I did, but you go ahead and figure out the math. If they're willing to do that, and your clerks or whoever's doing your submittals is willing to handle that little bit of a headache, knowing that there's going to be some corrections, then absolutely put it in there.
So another question in the chat. I know that our submission in cycle 5 will be up due to conservation districts submitting in the fire districts for labor. Not sure of the total yet, since this is pre-October 31. Is this part of the 200 million limit? And so do you, Eric or Jason, do you want to respond to that question? Or did you already?
It's pointing at me. I think, frankly, they've added in the pre-approved costs that they have on their spreadsheet, which are mostly the larger things, the case management systems, the EMS equipment. Anything that's outside of their hard list is going to push into that cap. What I don't know is how they're going to handle it when you all submit in January at the same time, and that number goes to 210. How are they going to figure out how to divvy up the 5 million or 8 million or whatever the number is at that point? That's a complete unknown for me and a scary thought. I hope that we can convince them to give the 210 or whatever the number ends up being, but we don't have that assurance right now.
Thank you, Jason. Another question here is, so where is the other 100 million going? That's the $100 million question, right?
Yeah, they have not actually told us where like an accounting of it. We're fairly certain the lion's share went to unemployment.
I found a great article in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle yesterday or the day before. It was a quote from the superintendent of schools in Bozeman that received a check for $600,000 from a redistributed CARES Act. Essentially, they took a chunk of money from the local government pot and distributed it out to schools. And essentially the statement was he didn't ask for it and he didn't know how they were going to spend it.
So they gave a little bit more, I think somewhere in the lines of 10 to 13 million to schools. They gave a little bit more to some business programs, but I think when you're talking $100 million that they swiped, the majority of the remainder of that is, we believe, stuck in the unemployment pot to allow for the additional higher benefits and to backfill.
This next question is dealing with the case management system. The carpal case management system, this needs to be, quote, in use by December 30th for reimbursement. I found DOA's Cycle 5 guidance to be confusing on this one. Any thoughts on that? Or
I'm reading the guidance to try and.
I find it to be confusing as well, but I think to be safe, the safest thing we can tell you is to stick with the previous guidance that says in use and operational by the 30th. If there's some some extraordinary deployment delay, then I think the state will give fair consideration to that. And I can't tell you with appropriate sideboards what those extraordinary circumstances will be. So if your implementer gets in a car wreck and dies on the last day before he gets it installed or implemented, I think they'll give you fair consideration. So plan to have it by the 30th. If extraordinary circumstances arise, know you'll get at least an ear or an opportunity to make a claim why you should be eligible for reimbursement if you don't hit that date.
One of the eligible costs was mailing costs for ballots. Is that correct? And can we still ask for those costs that were incurred before October 31st? And Jason's response was, return postage for November general elections are covered subject to the $200 million.
Yeah, and they are covered if they were incurred in November as well. They're not subject to the October 31st deadline, assuming that question is all combined.
Yeah. So that brings us up to the minute on the questions in the chat. Are there any other questions you might have that you want to ask over the microphone? Feel free, raise your hand. Oh, Chris, I see Chris has got a hand raised here. So go ahead and unmute Chris and ask your question.
Thanks. I guess it's not so much a question, but Eric and Jason, Missoula County is really concerned about the health department costs becoming ineligible. Primarily, of course, because they're the ones literally on the front line doing most of the, contact tracing, case investigation, isolation, quarantine, that piece of it. We had conversations with the city of Missoula and the League of Cities and Towns about their willingness to potentially reach out to the governor's office and push for the health department piece to still be covered. And I'm just wondering if MACo would consider potentially joining that push at the governor's office, just because that health department piece is huge, and losing that 2 months early with no surety from Congress that there'll be any additional funding potentially puts us, in places where we have to start thinking about, potentially shutting down operations that are specifically geared towards public safety, which seems like a really bad choice.
Chris, absolutely. I think, let's talk process now, because as I said before, we've been participating in these weekly meetings with the budget office. We had good working relationships. I'm going to say with the caveat that the folks internally that have been processing your applications and that have been working back and forth are fine people, and I think have done an amazing job given the circumstances. But somewhere, someplace, a policy decision was made to transfer this money to what the governor or somebody in the governor's office thought was a better use. If you can show me as our members, and I'm starting to gather this information for denials, but if you can show me detailed information about why you want a second consideration, especially for the presumptively eligible public health costs, I'm absolutely willing to take that back to the table and see if we can convince them to recarve out what was essentially a promise and a sideboard of $300 million for local government COVID-19 response costs. I think in Missoula County's case in particular, Chris, talk about what your burn rate is and cash out the door for your public health department in the middle of this pandemic.
Sure. So we're looking at a burn rate of about $20,000 a day just in testing, contact tracing, case investigation, and isolation. And so, we're looking at $600,000 a month, assuming a 30-day month, because we're running our operation 7 days a week. Adding testing and all that stuff over weekends, holidays. They did stop on Thanksgiving Day, but we're back at it the day after Thanksgiving. So, at $200,000 a day, $600,000 or $20,000 a day, $600,000 a month. That little bit of money that we got for presumptive health department salaries isn't going to carry that operation, past December, past January. We might be able to make it through January, and again, with no guarantee of congressional funding, it doesn't seem like the middle of winter and flu season is the time to stop doing testing and contact tracing.
And I think that's the kind of information that we need to try and get some reconsideration. I don't, the one of the other questions that we asked early on is the governor has that transparency website that shows where all the CARES Act money is gone. And it was updated the Wednesday that they told us that the money was gone, but it only showed less than $600,000 in money out the door. I think it's been updated since then, and there's only about $900 million of cash out the door. So there are pots of money that I think from a planning perspective, the budget office is ready to dump into that enhanced unemployment insurance fund, so they don't have to revert funds back to the federal level. I get that, but you guys are incurring costs. There are ambulance services that need equipment that they can't give. There are contact tracers. There are initiatives that are out there that we all had planned and put in place from a business planning perspective to be able to run at least through the end of December. And on your request, I will communicate with the governor's office that we are incurring incredible COVID-19 response costs, and shutting down the program the way that they did is not going to be beneficial for our constituents. I don't know how successful I'll be, and I'll tell you, as elected officials, your phone calls and your pressure from the budget office to the governor's office to the lieutenant governor's office is going to be much more than my kind of backdoor complaining that they shut it off with little to no notice. So I'll do it, but I'm going to ask you to start making those phone calls as well.
Chris, everything that you talked about, other than the presumptively eligible, the guidance indicates it's still eligible. But the problem is that cap, right? And if you're burning $600,000 a month in unbudgeted additional COVID-related costs in your public health department, and we have a $5 million window, you're going to take a big chunk. And so that cap is a significant problem for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, Eric, thanks. I appreciate you being willing to take that up. We've been in touch with me as well as the deputy budget director. Of course, Tom Livers is out right now, and making those contacts. And we'll continue to push that. But I appreciate MACo's support.
I think it was Missoula County and a couple others. I know people made phone calls after Wednesday when we were told, and the guidance changed dramatically. On Wednesday, it was shut off completely. On Monday, it was modified with a $200 million cap with some ongoing expenses. That's because people called and complained. That's not because I got mad and quit the task force, or that we refused to participate meaningfully in the follow-up Friday call. It's because you called and put pressure. So thank you.
Rosebud County has their hand up. So who would like to, can you go ahead and unmute yourself? There you go.
This is Bob Lee and Joanne Duffield. And my question to Eric is, how do we find out if our EMS equipment is on the list?
Well, last week I could have told you and confirmed it, but I need you to check with, and I'll tell you, Cheryl Gray is the best person that we're getting the confirmations for pre-authorizations from. You need to contact Cheryl to make sure that she has those costs on her list and that the pre-authorization is going to be sustained.
One other
Yes,
question.
sir. I have Colstrip Fire on the list, but confirm it.
Okay. Do you have Rosebud County EMS for 118,000?
I sure remember that one, and I think I'm the one that communicated back to you that it had been pre-authorized, but
Rosebud County Ambulance 118, yes.
How about Colstrip ambulance for 94,000? That would have been just done the other day.
What was the start of that? What was the name of it?
Colstrip ambulance.
Yes.
Okay.
I have Colstrip Fire written down, but it's ambulance for 94,000. Yes.
Okay. And one other question I have, Eric, is there any chance when we get a new governor in office next month that this could all change and they could come back and reimburse us?
So Jason's optimistic about that, but the rules of the CARES Act, both from Treasury and from the Office of Inspector General, are pretty clear that the money needs to be encumbered, incurred, or spent by the 30th of December. There will be a mad rush by this current administration to encumber these funds by the 30th. Realistically, though, there has to be money set aside for incurred costs up to the 30th to be reimbursable come in that January sequence. So if a new governor takes over in January and there's that, what I call that reconciliation pot that's set aside to pay what known costs are coming forward, then there's an opportunity to maybe divert some of those, and because it is entirely at the governor's discretion. But this administration will do everything they can to tie up those funds by the 30th because they're required to.
One of the things that frustrates me is when I heard the governor talk, he said, well, these expenses are already budgeted, but we also budgeted that income to offset those expenses, and that's what's really hurting.
So, Commissioner, there's been a lot of behind the scenes quiet conversation in the room with the budget office about this notion of a windfall. When Treasury said, we're going to create a category of presumptively eligible payroll costs and that you states will reimburse your local governments for, the Treasury did that and the CARES Act contemplated that because local government is the frontline responder to the COVID pandemic. You have incredible costs incurred and you are on the front line. Our state interpreted that to be somehow a backdoor method for counties making money off of this CARES Act distribution. And we have not been successful in communicating to them that there's no windfall for local government. There is no money made by local government in receiving these funds. At best, the property taxpayers are going to get a little bit of a reprieve in subsequent years because there's been a little bit of cash carryover from one year to the next, but you're not making money, and we have not been successful at communicating this or divesting them of this notion that there's a windfall for local government. I think that's why the money was swept the way that it was.
Thank you.
So there's
Jim.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Paul and Jim, on your question about non-employment expenses incurred in October but not paid till November, those are listed as still eligible. So the answer to your question is yes, they are available for reimbursement. Again, subject to this $200 million cap.
And the next question here is, there will be a cost involved in rolling out a vaccine. Is the state considering the impact on public health trying to vaccinate a state going into 2021?
I asked that question because towards the, in the October, November timeframe when we started to get whispers that a vaccine would be coming out, one of the vaccines in particular requires some significant cold storage. We had asked if the state would consider ramping up for some of that in advance of the distributions coming in January at best, and they have consistently said no. Even in terms of, there were a couple of counties that requested mobile immunization vans, and they rejected those at first, and then subsequently approved them because they originally thought it was vaccinations for COVID, but the requests were specifically so they could keep traditional county vaccines in place in the mobile unit and have COVID related vaccines that were necessary in their clinic. So across the board, no.
All right, the next question, could you provide Cheryl's contact information? I got a bounce back from C. Gray at mt.gov. So do you have another email address?
Yeah, so that's on me. That's my bad. Normally it's the first letter of somebody's name and their last name, and then at hers is CH Gray, CHGREY at mt.gov.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're good on raised hands. And the chat box seems to have, other than we got a comment from Ravalli County, has not yet received the reimbursement request that covered through August 31st. We were notified it was coming on November 23rd and to expect 7 business days. Today is the 7th day. Just to say this has gotten so old with the state, ... So a little bit of frustration there, it sounds like. Another question, our county health director told us that her CARES Act grant money had to be spent before December 30th and asked to use it for hazard pay for employees. Could we ask that the deadline for that spending be extended?
So I'm assuming this is CARES Act money outside of the local government piece. I don't know if they had additional guidance for that or not, but my general reaction in having worked with our portion of it is that yes, it still needs to be spent by December 30th. That hazard pay is not eligible, and that what they need to do is reach out to your auditor or figure out how you can call those dollars expended. You need to account for them as part of your payroll, as part of your ongoing expenses over the last several months, but you need to account for them as being expended, even if they replaced other budgeted costs. But my biggest recommendation is that you reach out to your auditor and ask them how to handle those specific dollars. With our program, it's a little easier because when you ask for the money back, you've already expended it, you've given your invoices, you've given your payroll reports. When you get it back, it's already been proved out.
And I think a follow-up on that is it's grant money she applied for and received. So I think they're dealing with grant monies.
So that will be different. She probably got, in the application, there was probably some guidance. They may have gotten a contract or some sort of scope of work. It's really hard for me to weigh in too much without having more details. I would look at the application, what you said you were going to do in the application. I would look at any sort of contractual or scope of work that was given back to you for compliance, and then I would also talk to the auditor.
Sounds like we've got several shout outs here for Cheryl and her responsiveness. Sweetgrass County says they've sent several emails to Cheryl and received very timely responses from her and approvals for laptops. That's coming, from Sweetgrass County. And, excuse me. So it seems Cheryl seems to be a good point of contact on those things. The state has asked that we cut a check back to them on the CARES Act public health relief monies no later than 12/30 or December 30th on dollars not yet spent. We are spending away and we are spending away to get ready for vaccines. So might hazard pay be different in her grant situation is a question.
It certainly could be.
Yeah.
And what I don't, some folks got direct deposits without asking for anything. I think those are different than folks that actually had some sort of a process that they went through and asked for money. I'm really hesitant to give blanket answers on how to deal with those other CARES Act funds or other grant funds that aren't CARES Act funds, and how you need to account for those. I would rather answer those one-on-one, and I may not have a good answer even then.
So temper your expectations. Jason can't do everything, right? On another note, has there been any further progress with auditors that everyone is using classifying the reimbursements as special revenue as opposed to having us journal back everything to the accounts the expense originally came from? Our auditors are saying all the money we have received is considered grants and has to be treated that way.
So I'll take a stab at this, but then I'll open it up to the table. It seems to me, at least from my last report and talking with our members, it's only Bob Denning and Associates that is still stuck on this notion that these are restricted funds coming back in and that you need to allocate them to the expenditure fund. Or apparently he has created, I think even in Beaverhead County, this notion that you create a new expenditure fund, run it into the negative, and then deposit that back into the reimbursements back into that negative revenue fund. None of that is necessary. The state is not requiring that. That is a peculiar auditor related, frankly, stubbornness on the part of an auditing firm, not recognizing that these aren't grants. Office of Inspector General has said they're not grants. U.S. Treasury has said they're not grants. The state of Montana has said they're not grants. The Local Government Services Bureau that does your audit compliances says they're not grants. They're not grants. And at this point, if an auditor is continuing to tell you that they're grants and that they have some limited use as you deposit them back in, consider significantly with you county commissioners accepting an audit finding to get that money into your general fund and to use it for general governmental purposes. That's what it's intended for. A single audit firm with a couple of auditors out there with this stubborn notion that they're grant funds is not accurate.
And I would pile on that it's not a reimbursement program in the true sense of a grant reimbursement program either. We simply set that up so that the state can be sure that when they get audited, they have the invoices, receipts, etc., necessary to get through their audit. That's the only reason you're asking for the money in arrears. So it's not truly a reimbursement program either. That's simply a bookkeeping, paper management effort for the state to make it easier for them when the feds come to audit them. So it's not a grant and it's not a reimbursement program in the truest sense of either one of those.
So I'm confused. Is the CARES Act money a grant?
No.
Not funny, Dan.
Hey.
Oh, it's Friday morning. I can pass a little bit of joke here. All right, what else we got here? We use Denning, and we are planning to accept the comment in our report. Still debating with them on the issue, but did include in my notes to the financial how we are reporting these funds. So there you go. Right, Rosebud County has another. Or you still have? Maybe I didn't take your hand down. So you got another question, Rosebud County? Or are you good there, Bob? You good?
Jason, this is Bob Lee again. In regards to our public health director asked about giving a bonus to her employees because of this COVID thing. So I sent Mackenzie an email yesterday asking about that. And she said, absolutely, you cannot give bonuses. And it wouldn't have been paid with the COVID grant money. But McKinsey said no bonuses. And if that's the same as hazard pay, I'm not sure. But McKinsey said no bonuses.
If you're looking for me to argue against McKenzie, it's not going to happen. No, I would agree. I mean, it's not, absent CARES Act, counties don't give bonuses. And even in CARES Act, they're pretty specific. The state's been specific about hazard pay. If somebody got a grant from somewhere else or a grant agreement and they have different guidance that I'm unaware of, then maybe, but everything I've seen has said no hazard pay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. And are there any other questions or comments in the chat? Here's your chance to get any clarification on where we're at, where we're standing with this CARES Act and the state's reimbursement. Our next meeting, a town hall meeting, is scheduled for December 18th at the same time. So that gives us another 2 weeks between now and then for things to happen that hopefully we can talk about on the 18th. But here's your chance now for any clarification or questions to be asked. And any other thoughts or comments that you, Eric or Jason, you want to share before we sign off?
Folks, we'll keep a tally of rejected proposals or costs that are incurred. We'll talk about those on the 18th. I think we'll get further clarity just knowing the process on pre-authorizations that are going to happen right now. So as uniquely worded as the current guidance is, I think submitting for pre-authorizations will provide some clarity so we can all be on the same page. But expect this to be a rocky road between now and the middle of January.
Yeah, if you would like help in wording a pre-auth request, or get some guidance, there's several of you have said, hey, does this look right? And I've helped edit some things. I will continue to do that for you, but the change will be that I will, in the end, I will say, here it is, it's ready, send it direct.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Eric and Jason, for your advocacy on behalf of the counties in trying to help bring clarification and understanding to these recent changes. As a reminder, our next meeting will be on the 18th of December. The next, what do we call this? Town hall meeting will be on the 18th. Also a reminder that our elected officials training will be taking place in Dillon on Tuesday and Shoto on Thursday of this coming week. And please visit the MACo website for more details, locations, and the agenda. And I think that's all I have. Anything else for the good of the order before we close down this town hall meeting? All right, see nothing else. Good luck, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you either this week or in a couple weeks.
Thanks, folks.